Hey, I thought I told you to get to your homework.
I'll get to it later.
I told you an hour ago.
I don't care. I'll get to it later.
Put that thing down.
I'm
Stop playing
the game. I've got another level to go. No.
Put that away.
No.
Now.
No.
Get to your room.
Go away.
I am taking everything away from you, and you're going to your room. You're going to stay in your room for 2 weeks, and you're not getting anything.
Try me.
You know, there's a story that caught our eye in the New York Times recently that asked a provocative question. Why do good parents often have problem children? Are there such things as bad seeds, kids who are just plain mean, despite the best efforts of their mothers and fathers? It's all rooted in the age-old debate of nature versus nurture, and as Juju explains, a bad nature will often trump even the best nurture.
It was one of the happiest days in Jodi Richardson's life, the birth of her first son 11 years ago.
It's kind of a wild experience. You know, the kids don't come with an instruction manual, and then all of a sudden, here you've got this little being that's totally dependent on you.
As a teacher, Jodi had plenty of experience with kids. She thought she and her husband were ready to be good parents. But even before he was out of diapers, she needed help.
At one point I went to the library and I got a book, you know, Your 3-Year-Old Friend or Foe. And
at first, she thought it was the terrible twos, lashing out at Mommy, especially after his baby brother came along.
he said, well, I wish you were dead and I wouldn't even come to your funeral.
And now, at 11, he's beginning to threaten her physically.
Just body posture and come up and kind of get in my face and, you know, what are you going to do about it, Mom?
His bullying behavior has gotten him suspended several times, and other parents have confronted Jodi about his aggressions and her parenting.
It's embarrassing, and pretty much every day you kind of think, well, what have I done to bring this on? What am I doing wrong?
Her younger son is perfectly behaved, and yet even she questions her own parenting. None of her disciplining seems to work. She and her husband spent thousands on child psychologists and testing, but he's never been diagnosed with any kind of physical or emotional issues.
Why would I want to raise a bully? I am trying hard.
But there is a cold, almost taboo reality Jodi may need to consider, according to psychiatrist Dr. Richard Friedman. He believes in some cases a child might just be a bad seed.
There are going to be kids who are intrinsically nicer and more loving and empathic, and there are going to be kids who are intrinsically unempathic and mean.
Dr. Friedman says the simple fact is, good parents can raise bad kids. Boys and girls behaving badly, everything from tantrums to cruelty, even physical aggression, behavior that has no psychological diagnosis or triggers. It usually starts early and continues well through adulthood.
I'm not talking about kids who are fledgling psychopaths, but, you know, kids who are just garden variety mean.
It's an idea that turns traditional child psychology on its head. Instead of saying there are no bad kids, only bad parents, Dr. Friedman argues maybe some kids are just hardwired to behave badly, tipping the scales towards nature in the nature versus nurture debate.
In a sense, it lets parents who are doing everything right have a realistic sense of what they're responsible for and not to feel guilty for things they can't control.
But Friedman's critics say the suggestion that a bad seed will naturally grow into a bad adult doesn't give struggling parents reason to hope.
He didn't leave much room for any parent to raise their child when they discover they have a difficult child.
Instead of giving up on their aggressive kids, he says it's still worth it for parents to keep trying new tactics.
I believe most children, the majority of children, can change if the parents learn a different mode of effective and powerful parenting.
Jodi Richardson says it's comforting to think that she's not completely to blame for her son's bullying, but she says she's not letting herself off the hook either and will keep working to make things better.
You hope that when he's a grown-up that you can look back and go, okay, that was rough, but now you've made it and we get along.
And our parenting contributor, Ann Plachette Murphy, joins us now. And boy, that's kind of tough to watch. You see a mother there who is trying so hard, brought to tears by the fact that her kid just won't behave.
Well, it makes her feel inadequate. It makes us feel frustrated and really angry when our kids just are not behaving the way we want, or when there's this kind of constant sense that everything you do isn't going to do anything.
So do you buy this bad seed theory?
I really don't. I mean, I think it's very important what Dr. Friedman said, unless we're talking about a child who's, sociopathic or really has serious problems, that it's both, and that, in fact, it's really important to recognize that behavior can be changed. I mean, this child is 11 years old, so first of all, she's in for the teen years, and then, that can get a lot worse before it gets better. But, what I tell parents is, first of all, you have to think about what's the behavior you want to change. Is it this angry outburst that he's exhibiting all the time, or threatening behavior? And then say what you want to see. In other words, state the positive. I want you to take a deep breath and count to 10 and then say calmly what you want, even if you're angry. I want you to do that. And I want you to do it between 6 and 8 at night. That's the window we're working on. And then you reward the positive behavior. You ignore the negative as much as possible. And I know this sounds simple. It's not simple. You have to do it over and over. But there's lots of research, George, that shows it works.
So a lot more emphasis on carrots than sticks.
Exactly.
But what happens? You try all that. Clearly, Jody had gone through hundreds of hours of psychologists trying to get help, and it still doesn't work.
I think that whenever I hear this, I think, this is your kid. It's worth another 100 hours, and continue to get the help. And she needs to get the help, too, and the support, including being able to vent about this. I'm really glad we're doing this piece. It's important to admit sometimes that you're really upset and frustrated and you're really angry at your kid. That's perfectly okay. But don't give up.
Okay, Ann Plachette Murphy, thanks very much. And we do want to hear from all of you. If you want to share a story with us or weigh in with what you think about all this, go to our website, abcnews.com/GMA.
Needs to know. Buckle up, don't do drugs, and remember your please and thank you. You do your best to put your kids on the right track. Sometimes, though, it's a rocky road for some parents. And guess who gets to blame? Well, no matter what you do, parents are always taking the fall when their kids are bad or they do the wrong thing. We're looking at some bad kids that are being loaded up there on the bus by the cops. Experts say, though, it's not always mom and dad's fault. We thought this would be comforting to many of you. Dr. Norman Hoffman is the author of Bad Children Happen to Good Parents, and Margie Mannion is a parenting expert. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doc, let me start with you and ask you, how do you define a bad kid?
Well, there are a plethora of soft signs we've developed at the Hoffman Institute in Daytona Beach. It's old research material, but we brought it to the forefront. We see these kids right from the first year, the first 18 months of life. We see a lot of signs, such as even from the bottle feeding, they're more irritable, they're more difficult, and they resist hugging from their parent. They seem to struggle with early developmental milestones. And these are the kids that are more difficult to raise. And we see that as they grow up. They project blame on others. They don't feel guilt. They have objective anxiety, but they don't seem to have subjective anxiety. It doesn't last beyond the crime or beyond the insult of maladaptive behavior.
Yeah, you say there's also a lack of remorse. They're often manipulative. Margie, let me ask you this. When I think of bad kids, sometimes I think of kids who have everything but just can't seem to get their behavior under control. And let's put any medical reasons aside for that, because often it is not a child's fault, certainly not a parent's fault. But I think of those Barbie bandits. You see pictures of beautiful girls who come from good homes, reportedly, and they go in and they rob a bank, and they're so happy about it that they end up bragging about it, the Barbie bandits, afterwards, Margie. Whose fault is that?
Well, I think that bad kids can happen to good parents, but I don't think it just happens all of a sudden. I think that there are signs, like the doctor was saying, from a very early age. Kids start showing empathy and compassion at the age of 2. So, just like showing general concern when somebody gets hurt or taking care of their dolls. And some kids definitely are more difficult to parent than other kids. That is obviously true. But I do think it's the parents' responsibility to foster those kids and to teach to them.
All right, everybody, I guess, tries to do their best. Doc, what's your advice if you have one of those bad kids?
Well, first of all, the news research that we're performing now is showing that 1 out of 25% of these children have these kind of conditions. So we work a program for the parents to increase the discomfort for the child, because if a child doesn't have discomfort when they're showing maladaptive behaviors, they're not going to change from individual therapy.
All right, so let me
the
just
real emphasis...
ask parents to look for that. They can also look for your book. I want to get back to this wicked weather. Lives are being lost. Dr. Norman Hoffman and Margie Mannion. The book is Bad Children Happen to Good Parents. It's on Amazon.com. No worries, Doc. Take care.
Biological breaks. You know where the bathrooms are, right down back of us to the where you come in, right across from the registration. We're going to try to have breaks, not real breaks, but they're going to be working breaks in which you'll have time to leave this particular setting and go out with your wherever you want to go for 15-20 minutes. And at that time you can get your coffee, and you can get coffee and go breaks anytime, but if you could do it during that particular period, it would be more advantageous, so that when we have the breaks you can use it as a break and also as an exercise, which we're going to be doing a few of those. Next thing, beepers. How many are carrying beepers today? Okay, could you put it on that thing called vibrator? Or massager, as some of us call them, so that you're not going to beep in here? Okay. Most of the workshop... Well, we'll take care of that now. That's good. Yeah. Because I'm notorious for having those things beep. Now it's really gets to be annoying. Especially phones. No phones, right? Okay. You won't really have to take a lot of notes, hopefully. I've worked this workshop so that everything I'm talking about will be handed out to you. So as we go over things, you'll have them in nice printed notes. You don't have to feverishly be writing. And I hate going to a workshop myself, and I've been to thousands of them where you have to take notes. So this is the housekeeping right now. We'll take care of it. So that, you know, again, feel free, of course, to take notes. But hopefully, by the end of the workshop, everything will be handed to you. If you notice that the 7 CEUs that I'm offering for the licensed people and teachers is really at a low cost. Most times when you go to workshops and getting 7 CEUs, it's quite costly, up to $100. And we're trying to keep our workshops really low and at a cost-effective kind of basis for people in the working field. Obviously, people in Central and North Florida aren't making as much as the people do in South Florida. So we're trying to accommodate that and keep our costs down. I'd like to just, for a few minutes, just introduce a few of the support people that are working here today and helping with the workshop. Our video technician, Sue Riley. She is the acting center director right now at Child Family Center. And Child Family Center is a new facility in DeLand and also officed in Ormond Beach. And I'll tell you a little bit about that after I introduce a few more of the support staff. Over there, Joanne Newby at the registration desk, and Louise Miller. And I'd like to just introduce and by the way, Valerie Watt is our clinical consultant who's right here in front for Child Family Center. And I am the clinical director of that particular facility. Okay. Child Family Center is a new concept. Donna has been involved in daycare facilities for years, working with infants and children up to about 5 and even higher, depending on how many we have kids in that facility that are even older. But that has been classically a daycare facility in which you bring a child and you watch them, and they're usually businesses, and they do well or they're not doing well. And they're licensed by HRS, and you have to provide all kind of regulations and fulfill the regulations of the state. We're doing something quite unique. We're not only doing that kind of a daycare facility, but we're bringing the clinical field into the daycare facility, in which we're going to provide clinical assessment testing for learning disabilities, learning issues, for attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity. We're going to be interfacing with the primary care physicians. We're going to be doing what we used to do, and Carol, you probably remember, in the, I don't mean to say this about the old days, but the old days we had treatment teams in which the social worker, the psychiatrist, the physician, the nurse, the clinician, the psychologist, everyone got together and did a treatment team evaluation or review. That's almost unheard of today in private practice. It's just not done because it's too cost prohibitive to get everybody together. You can't even get them on the phone, let alone it face to face. Well, we're going to be providing that at this facility, and we're going to be trying to work towards helping the community in Flagler and Volusia County and providing help for these kids that hasn't been provided before. And we're even going to be trying to, at little cost to no cost, and using insurance, whatever means we can get, getting grants to fulfill this, trying not to turn away anybody. And so that's a brand new pioneering kind of effort. We have a facility right now in DeLand on Florida Avenue, and we're housing our office now in Ormond Beach. And Valerie will be doing a lot of the clinical therapeutic work with this group. So if you have any more questions about that, you can ask Donna. And I'm sure she'd be glad to talk to you privately. Okay. How about if I just find, let me see if, I look at this like I can read it without my glasses. I think I covered all that. Good. For just the next few minutes, can I just get you to say who you are and what you expect to get out of today's session, today's seminar? Can we start right there?
Judy Johnson. I work for Volusia County School Board as a school psychologist. I primarily serve elementary children, and I would just like to learn more techniques to pass on to parents and teachers who work with difficult children.
Okay. Weren't you at Timbercrest? I remember. Remember her? Okay. You're next. We'll just go right through here. Go ahead.
I'm a school psychologist. I work in the New Smyrna Beach area in Southeast Volusia for elementary schools. And a common concern is handling difficult children, so teachers and parents. So I see these as more tips and techniques and strategies for learning.
Okay. Valerie?
I'm Valerie Watt. I'm a licensed clinical social worker working in Ormond Beach Counseling and Psychotherapy Centers. And I'm here also to develop more techniques and to hear what you have to say and to be impressed.
I told her how to say everything. I wrote that all down. Go ahead.
I'm Lynn Morrison. I'm with Orange City Elementary as a counselor. And I'm here to get more techniques. And I love the idea of being impressed.
I'm Judy Anderson, guidance on elementary, and I'm here for fresh perspectives and perhaps some options that we work with children.
Okay.
Gail O'Leary, Enterprise Elementary guidance.
Where's your tag, Gail? I need to know who your names are. That's for me, actually, these tags, not for yourselves. So please wear them. Okay. And where are you from?
Enterprise Elementary.
Okay.
Ann Frederick, I'm director of Halifax Park Pre-K United Child Care Organization, and I'm here to find out anything new where we can help our children that have a hard time dealing with things sometime, and help our teachers to help our children.
Okay, thank you.
She's Judy Kosarek. I speak for her because she has laryngitis. She's with United Child Care. She's parent resource consultant.
Okay, good. You won't have to do a lot of talking today. Yeah, you'll be listening. Let's start.
I'm Jeannie Dolan. I'm licensed mental health counselor. I'm currently unemployed, but I'm hoping to get back into the school system. So I've come here to...
A lot of people might be able to employ you here today.
Oh, really?
From United Child Care on up, on down, wherever.
I'm Vicki Jackson. I'm a licensed mental health counselor and a recovering politician. And I run a bar called Cabana Sports Club and Club, so I'm here to drum it up.
Oh, God. Last night was the time that when we walked in here, the whiskey smell was incredible. Yeah. Go ahead.
Ellen Cummings, I'm a guidance counselor at Hall Hill Elementary, and there's a lot of difficult children in here that I want to help the teachers and parents.
Okay.
Denise Fox, I'm with McGinnis Elementary in Galena Springs, and to give you maybe a new perspective and some ideas and techniques in dealing with parent children.
Very good.
I'm Gail
Leslie. I'm from the Children's Home Society out of Osceola County. I'm with the Adolescent and Family In-Home Counseling Program there. And I was particularly intrigued when I saw your brochure about your background in music therapy. I don't know if we'll get any hints of that at all in this particular session. And then working with very frustrated parents, sometimes it's very hard to help them when they're going through those difficult times, and hoping to learn some techniques to help them so they can work through that with their child.
Okay.
And I'm Brad Martin, counselor at Spruce Creek Elementary. Just like everybody else, same thing. I'm getting ready to start parent classes.
Aha.
One of the keys for being here, I also in charge of going back and helping teachers, training teachers.
Great.
Bring all this information back to them.
Hi, I'm Connie Wade. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I work for ACT Corporation in the East Myrna Beach Satellite Clinic. And I'm very interested in finding new tips to help a lot of the parents of children I see. Nina Holiday, and I'm an intern at ACT Corporation doing postgraduate licensure work, and begun to share work with children, and develop my competency in that area.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm Julianne Rosenbaum, and I am a licensed eligible marriage and family therapist working for ACT Corporation in the New Smyrna Beach office. And I do a lot of play therapy with children, and I work with children of all ages, and the hardest clientele are the adolescents, so I was really hoping to get some tips in working with the adolescents and tips to give their parents.
Okay. Carol?
I'm Carol Offer. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, formerly with Iodine. I'm not quite sure where I'm playing.
I think you're in transition.
I'm in a transition. I've worked over the years with a lot of difficult kids, and I say also a lot of very difficult parents. And so always interested in learning.
Thank you, Carol.
I'm Susan Sayers. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I work for Blue County Schools as a school social worker. I have 3 elementary schools, and I have the high school here. And I see a lot of parents that are real frustrated, and I also get some pointers because
Thank you.
Joy, I'm a music specialist at Smoke Elementary, and taking a counseling class at Stetson.
Well, we hope we'll whet your curiosity.
Hi, I'm Trish Taylor. I'm not a mental health profession. I'm an engineer, but I'm the parent of an 8-year-old ADHD oppositional child. So I live with this 24 hours a day, and I'm tired of the guilt that I get from other people about, assuming it well. If you're a better parent than your child wouldn't have this problem, that kind of thing. It's really tough to deal with. And I've been writing my son's counselors and psychiatrists for 4 years, and we're just starting to get somewhere with it now in the past year. But I'm here to get this information.
Okay.
Donna Johnson, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Work mostly in the area of domestic violence and homeless women and children.
Can you all hear? Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Homeless women and children and domestic violence, and those children, whether they're homeless or have been in domestic violence situations, are very difficult children to work with.
You bet. Okay.
I'm Ann Roberts, an elementary guidance counselor from Seminole County, and I'm just hoping to be a better resource for my teachers and parents for our uncaring children that we see more and more of.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Lee Monster, and I'm just a parent of a difficult child.
Okay. You're not just.
My name is Margaret Ade. I work for the Land Use and Field Preschool Program.
Okay.
We work with children 1 to 3 with special needs and trying to get some information at my home.
Okay.
I'm Jeanette Love, and I work at the Community Society in the Parenting Center. Brian is home and obviously we work under the management.
Okay, great.
My name is Michelle Rose, and I'm a guidance counselor at Drnormcares Elementary in North Carolina, and I'm looking for information on social center.
Okay.
I'm Walter Barker, licensed marriage and family therapist with Pathfinders Counseling in Orlando. Really enjoy working with adolescents, and especially the really difficult ones.
You enjoy that?
Yeah, I like the challenge.
There's a masochist.
Really fun.
How was the ride from Orlando? Yeah? No, yesterday we'd have gotten here. Go ahead.
I'm Frank, and I'm with Pathfinder's Counseling, and I work with children under 5. I'm a developmental play therapist, and work mainly with reactive attachment disorder.
Wasn't there a developmental play therapist up here in Central Florida, Orlando, a woman? That's the one. Yeah, St. Petersburg, okay. What's she doing now?
Still teaching at 85 and being a supervisor.
Is that, okay, great. Okay.
I'm Joe Sable. I'm a group psychologist at the East County School, and I'm here looking for recipes to share with parents and colleagues.
Thank you.
I'm going to say I'm a licensed mental health counselor private practice in Longwood, and I was particularly interested in the uncaring part of that. So we can say he didn't take care and doesn't respond to punishment that he just expects repetitive techniques, and to help them break through that to understand it.
Okay.
I'm Scott Kay, I'm a parent, inherited my wife from my attitude.
Thanks, Scott. He's also a stand-up comic.
I'm here so I can get the first-hand knowledge, so I can help my teachers and my principal and my school, so I understand, so I can relay the information. That's a big problem, and a lot of that information is hard to explain to parents, so I would like to get it first-hand knowledge.
Thank you, Terry.
I'm Ted Burgess. I'm a clinical social worker, not yet licensed for Latter-day Saints Social Services, and I also work in a University Behavioral Center on weekends in Orlando.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm Regina Thompson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and registered play therapy supervisor. Obviously, I work with children, and I'm interested in learning more about the definition of the difficult child and some tips on how to work with them.
Thank you. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Joan City, I'm a licensed mental health counselor, independent contractor, currently with a partial hospitalization service for chronically mentally ill adults. Worked with children for almost 20 years, and I think it's a blood disease. So the topic interests me, and a lot of our patients are so low functioning that I'm kind of hoping maybe I'll find some techniques that would transfer.
Okay, good. Well, thank you all for taking part in this. I know sometimes that's anxiety producing, but it reduces my anxiety having you guys talk in the beginning. Anyway, anyone here from the 60s, 50s, you know, when we used to do a lot of unique things we don't do anymore? Okay, good. I'm not asking your age, of course. But back in the dark ages of psychology, psychiatry, and some of the people who raised their hands certainly can identify with this, we did things quite differently. We had a lot more money in the facilities so we could provide incredible services to everybody who came in. I started in '63 as a music therapist at Devereux Foundation. I actually had a background as a jazz musician. I was a piano player, and in '63 I quit. I went off the road. Most of the people I was working with were probably sicker than anybody I've ever treated in the entire 34 years I've been in practice. And I mean that truthfully. I didn't know what schizophrenia was, but I saw what it was before I studied it. So I had a great background in mental illness prior to my even going to school. And I very quickly got disillusioned working with, I was at Devereux Foundation, working with retarded kids, emotionally disturbed children, autism. If you remember Leo Kanner and Bernard Rimland, who invented the terms of autism, these were kids who were actually being treated by these people who have been treated. And then you get the celebrity people who go to Devereux. Back then, I think it was about $8,000. Now it's about $30,000 in Devon, Pennsylvania, to go for a year. And it was probably, at that time, the greatest treatment facility in the United States, not the world. What I found quite early in working with these kids, do you remember by the way, when you were being taught your practice, that it was usually, especially if you were a Freudian like I was, psychoanalytic treatment was based on finding fault with the parent. I mean, it was never written that said that, but if you think back, what do you find that occurred in this child's life quite early that demonstrated conflict? How did they get conflict? Well, it was always the mother. Freud never wrote about the father, so mom was always the blame. And that's probably, Scott, why you're being pulled in by mom, because she's the one who feels all the guilt. Women were taught to feel guilty about raising the kid. Dad was working, mom is raising the kid, so it's obviously mom's fault. Dad comes home, he's the disciplinarian. So we would spend months analyzing and evaluating what mom did wrong. Now, Dad was working, so he couldn't do anything wrong. So we'd find out, well, the kid was, didn't suck their thumb, they weren't breastfed properly, they were breastfed too short a time, they were toilet trained too rigidly, or they were in the ordinal position of children. They were the firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn, or fourthborn. It didn't matter what it was, we'd find fault whatever the ordinal position was. I had asked a question in a treatment team review that I had stated, it appears to me that here is a child who's coming out of a sibling group of 3 kids. This kid is the second born. This kid's schizophrenic. Child number 1 and 3 are loving, desirable, easy to raise children. So the psychiatrist would come up and say something, well, you don't understand, Norman, that this is the second born, he was missed in the pocket, they ignored him. And in their ignoring this child, he developed isolation, he developed anaclitic depression, he developed double bind, whatever he developed. Then we'd see a few weeks later a child who was the firstborn. Well, this is the firstborn. All the responsibility was placed on this firstborn child. So that's the reason he developed phobias or depression or whatever symptoms that were presenting. Back then, if you also recall, in the 60s and 50s and 40s, that schizophrenia was blamed on the mother as well. Remember the double bind theory? Classic double bind theory is during Christmas, a child gets two sweaters as gifts from the mother. The kid comes downstairs with one of the sweaters. He says, how do I look, Mom? She says, you don't like the other sweater? So that's supposed to cause schizophrenia, where a child can't make up their mind to please mom. And back then, people were talking about Freud as fact, not theory. If Freud said it was a fact. And so bringing up these questions, you became a malcontent in the psychoanalytic parlance of our groups. Even today, when I sent out these brochures, there were letters coming back from, I got one from a clinical social worker. I won't read it because it'll bore, it's sort of boring, but he spent probably a couple days writing this, researching it, telling me that he's offended by my using the word uncaring child. And uncaring to him, I should have said overacted, highly spirited, difficult maybe at the least. But uncaring, he said, no child is uncaring. And he cited 3 or 4 references. So it was a real brilliant critique. But again, this is, I think, how most people are going to, not most, the general population deals with this. And if you look on the talk shows today, a mother or a father gets up and they say they want to divorce their child, everyone boos in the audience. So they're already being thrown darts at. So this is a very unpopular kind of field to even discuss that a child, it may be the child's fault. Going back to the 60s. While at Devereux, we continue to see difficult kids, wild kids, hyperactive kids, autistic kids. Autistic children are also blamed on mom and dad as being cold and ineffectual. So they caused autism. So it took 20 more years to realize that it was chemical imbalances, hereditary kind of factors. And who knows what ADD was called back in the 50s? Remember? What's that? Close. There. MBD. MBD, not ADD, MBD. Minimal brain dysfunction. And we had thousands of workshops on MBD. The classic thing was we could never find an organic cause of this. And so therefore, we didn't know what it was. So it was a catch-all like bipolar disorder is today. So back in the 60s and the 70s, working our way through this kind of dilemma, we're trying to find some reason for these kids to have these kind of major difficulties. And to even infer that maybe they were born this way was absolutely unheard of. It was always caused by someone. And if it wasn't the mother, it was an uncle who may have abused the child, or the father could have been abusive. So there are bad parents. I mean, we all know that. This is not a seminar in trying to get rid of the idea that bad parents don't raise difficult kids. That we know. We're also talking about a certain segment of children that I believe are wired different right from the beginning. And if you really look at the early infancy and the toddlership, we'll see things that I'm outlining in this course that you'll start to begin to say, hey, these are soft signs. These are kind of behavioral differences that seem to look different than another child or 19 other kids that do different kind of behaviors. I also, in diagnosing these kind of children, I try to look at a behavioral complex versus a symptomatology complex. For instance, in treating uncaring children, I want to know if there is any other symptoms. I differentiate symptoms and behavior. If a child comes in with depression, anxiety, phobias, etc., 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 and they're also having problematic behavior, that to me is not an uncaring child. Okay, this may be uncaring characteristics, but the classical uncaring child is symptom-free. These children, I believe, from my research and studies and looking at the different characteristics of children, appear to be coming 1 out of 20, 5% of the children appear to have this complex. Now, there are varying degrees of the other 19 kids. They may have some of these traits. As you go down the list or the criteria of difficulty, the prognosis is always better. If you have the one child out of 100, out of 20, the 5%, that child will never change. So we always hope that when we see our kid, it's not that kid. That's the kid who goes to jail for 6 months, comes out and steals a car again. Goes back to jail, goes in for a year this time, and goes into a home and never seems to learn from experience. That's the 5% of difficulty that nobody's going to treat or deal with. It's impossible. They're not going to learn from anything they do. We're going to try to deal with the other children that fall within that other group that maybe after a while we can rewire some of the thinking processes so that they can start to learn from their mistakes. If we are consistent enough, effective enough, and persevering enough so that we can work with these kids. I have, if you've been watching the TV circuit lately, the Montel Williams, Jessica Raphael, a lot of these kids are coming on TV. I have edited out about 3 kids, and I want to show you these kids. After you look at these kids, here's where you can take notes, by the way, because after you get done taking a look at this and observing these kids on the monitor, I want you to break up into teams of 3. You can stay right at the table if you want, or you can leave and take a little break, get your coffee, take a biological respite. But I want you to come up with what you would do in your own practice or home with this group of kids. Any one of them. I want you to do them by name. And think in terms of what and how you would deal with them. Because these are the most difficult of all. These dramatically deal with children that you'd say, oh my God, I can't believe that exists. How are we going to blame the parents? What did they do wrong? By the way, I'm not exonerating these parents or these kids. Trust me. I used to be in Tough Love where I was consultant in Fort Lauderdale, and we had some nasty parents come into these groups to exonerate themselves of guilt, and I wouldn't let them get away with it. And the group was, that's the other problem with Tough Love. It's a great group, but you have to be careful that you don't get parents in there to rid themselves of all the guilt, because there are a lot of guilty parents, and they need to change their stuff. We have parents who are abusing the kids, who are isolating the children, who are being over punitive. I'm not talking about that group of parents. They still need family therapy, and they need all the traditional kind of stuff that we're dealing with. Before I do the film, while I'm still thinking about it, you're all familiar with parent effectiveness training. The classical training. STEP program. Remember STEP, Systematic Training for Effective Parenting? Do you know whose theory that came from? Drnormcares, Rudolf Drnormcares. Drnormcares was the physician who wrote the book Children the Challenge. Back in the 60s, I was certified as a Drnormcares parent trainer. Wow. And anyone could do that after about 16 weeks, by the way. You didn't have to be a clinician. You could just be a parent. And you know what they said? They said, when you have a child who's throwing a temper tantrum, and we were teaching parents this, you ignore the temper tantrum. In fact, he suggested decorating your bathroom, locking yourself in the bathroom with a stereo headset, having a lot of great magazines and nice stuff on the wall of the bathroom, so you could stay there for about a half hour until the temper tantrum rids itself. So it sounded pretty, dramatic and bizarre enough that it should work. But the parents were coming back and saying, I did that. I'm having a great time in the bathroom, but I come back out and there's a window broken, the chandelier's broken, the kids are bloodied, and I don't think it's working. Well, you're not doing it right. You turn the music up so you don't have to. But we were telling people to do this stuff. They're still, therapists today are still confused about how to deal with temper tantrums. From ignore it to what? Beat the kid up? Scream at the kid? So we do a variety of different kind of techniques. I'm going to try to give you, by the end of the day, my conceptualization of how to deal with all these kind of issues in a simple, effective manner. Research has shown, if I'm not starting to vary a little bit, stop me, just raise your hand and say, I can't understand what you're saying. Research has shown, and this you can write this down, it's not in any of the things, that in order to change one negative, unconscious, maladaptive behavior, it takes between 20 to 25 attempts at conscious, effective technique. One of the reasons marital therapy doesn't work is because when they start becoming successful in your office, they usually quit therapy, usually after they're starting to feel better and they're starting to effectively communicate. 3 months, 6 months later, they come back in, they're saying we're fighting worse than ever because now we did all this work and we hate each other even more because I don't want to work anymore. So you may lose one of the spouse. Yes? A conscious attempt, a conscious behavioral attempt to change one negative unconscious behavior. So if you have a behavior of somebody in, say, marital therapy who is abusing his spouse by verbal language, and then you teach a technique to that couple, they're going to have to effectively make a conscious attempt at least 20 to 25 times that they work on that. They can actually count them and log them. Most of the time they'll do it 3 or 4 times in a couple-week period, or they come back and say, well, we didn't have an opportunity because they're in a honeymoon period and they're not having any more conflict because they're worried about coming back into the session. Whatever the reason is, they have to consciously do this over and over and over. They actually have to practice this so that the unconscious behavior becomes conscious, and then they keep rehearsing it. And that's the same thing with effective parenting. When you have a child, you can't expect to do this behavior 10 times. What do parents do when it doesn't work after 10 times? They change and do something else. And yet that behavior may have been the thing that they should have continued doing. So most of us know what to do. We just don't know what to do. Because we've done it, it doesn't work. Or it worked for a day or two, now it doesn't work. And we have to know at least that was a really good thing to do. Let's keep doing this because it eventually will work. And I think we have to have a better armamentarium of effective material than the kid does. Because these kids are brilliant at diffusing. I don't know where they learn to, well, that's another thing. We'll get into that. Okay. Any questions before I go into the tape? Because that's just sort of a little dissertation about where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Yeah. When you say uncaring child, you mean the sort of a sociopath?
Sort of. These kids range from lack of remorse, lack of guilt, and there's varying degrees of all this.
Is there another name for sociopath?
No, it's not really, because these kids, if you look at sociopathic behavior, generally we think of the criminal, the guy that's going to go out and steal, they're going to do some criminal kind of behaviors and mischiefs. These kids can change if, most of these kids, if you effectively do therapeutic response to these kids, even though they have some different wiring, they're different other kids, if you maintain an approach and you can remove yourself from the the emotional conflict that you go through, the guilt and everything else. We know we're not guilty, we got to make it the kid's problem. We've heard that, make it the kid's problem. We have to step out of this arena, and I'm going to talk about that more, about anxiety and how that's done in the afternoon sessions, where subjective anxiety versus objective anxiety. These kids, by the way, and again, I'm ahead of myself, do feel anxiety. Sociopaths feel anxiety and depression, unbeknownst to us. They really have the same emotions everyone else do, but they have it differently than we do. And I'll explain that as I understand it. Okay, any other questions before I put the tape on? Pass out those profiles of, I have 4 profiles of uncaring children that are very specific kind of kids that I've seen and been able to characterize, and some of the traits that these particular kids are indigenous to. When you get your papers, if we remember what autism was all about, there was a term called autoplasty. Remember that term, anyone? Autoplasty is like the amoeba, who has no real form, no real personality, when you look at the person, you don't know who they really are when you start to investigate them. And the chameleon is that kind of a person, like the lizard, capable of changing his colors. That's a misspelling, allos, he is also able to change his disposition or habits, doesn't see anything wrong with himself, devoid of any traces of warmth. He gives the impression of making a good adjustment to life, but actually takes on the personalities of others and copies their ideas and ideals. He's ready to adopt any and all their attitudes, reactions, behaviors that he feels are expected. He has no real identifiable personality. He appears to shift from thing to thing, person to person. I've seen many kids who appear to have intact personalities on the surface. And after working with these kids, you realize that they just copied someone else's personality, because 3 months later there's someone else. They've identified with another figure in their life. And they take on the interest and motivations and the personality of people in their life. There was one girl I remember who was expounding on new music that she had heard. And she's listening to this and intently involved in it, and telling me all about the different people. When I found out in reality is she didn't really listen to this. She was being told by a friend about these new things, and she took on that personality characteristics of her friend. And then when that fad was over, she went from person to person when it was no longer dramatic enough for people to be responding to her. What I found in this particular individual is that unless she was on getting the attention at the moment, she got bored with what was going on and then went to something new to get your attention again. And this is what I call the chameleon, and I see there are many kids that I see who take on these particular characteristics. The reason I put this down is because I think if we look at some of the profiles, we may know to identify a child's characteristics as part of diagnoses. How do you diagnose somebody without knowing what they are? And what appears to be one thing may be something else. What I do in therapy is I want to know if the words and the behavior are congruent. If someone says, I love you, and they stiffen up and they're rigid, your mate is like this, and they can't touch you and they can't talk to you about the feelings, you wonder, do they really love you? I want to investigate what they mean by the words, I love you. So if a kid says, yeah, this appeals to me, I want to deal with this, and they don't do it. They say they're going to do it and they don't do it, then I'm wondering, is that schizophrenia? Is that crazy? That's a hallucination, isn't it? If someone says something and they don't do it, that to me is unreal. Then how do you trust if a person says something and it doesn't match the behavior? That's scary. And how many people in your life today don't do that or incongruent? Do you have friends with people who say something and they don't do it? I personally measure relationships and friendships by a person's behavior and their word content. So when a child's word content and behavior are different, I want to know more about who that person really is. And I don't know how to work with anyone who's incongruent. It's very difficult because you don't know where you are from moment to moment. And that's real life, forgetting patient care. Okay, the operator. Now later on I'll be talking about dominance and some really earth-shaking information about dominant behavior. The operator is usually a very dominant character who is a wheeler-dealer. This is a person who usually has no guilt or remorse for any of his actions. He's usually highly manipulative, doesn't care about the rights of others, and is able to seize the moment and opportunity. Great fake. His words never match his behavior again. And what he does is he's able to take from you while he appears to be giving back, but he really doesn't give anything back unless he wants to. But he's basically a very uncaring individual. And these operators are usually the guys who are dealing in drugs. They're usually the people who are seizing the moment and opportunity in life. And these are patients that come in, not just children, by the way. These are uncaring adults as well. Anybody know any operators in your life? Married to any? Used to be married to some? Okay, the operator. And I have some little blurbs about the kind of behavior and the preoccupation with their own pleasures, problems, self-gratification. No bonding. And that's a real disastrous kind of thing, to have a child who doesn't appear to be bonded with anybody. They don't seem to really care about any parent figure. And I know as parents we never want to believe that. We want to believe we're missing something. But if you ever experienced being with a child, your own child, that doesn't seem to bond with you or your husband or your mate, and doesn't seem to bond with their friends. They say they have a lot of friends, but they really don't. They're just casual acquaintances, and they can squeal in their friends just as easily as anybody else. So that's a real tragic kind of character trait in somebody who never really bonded. And we wonder where that comes from. Of course, all these psychoanalysts here would say it's probably from the oral stage of development that something happened. They were arrested somehow. They were improperly breastfed, or the formula was toxic, or something happened during that period, and they never were allowed to bond. And I'm not sure what Viola Brady would say about bonding, but it happens. And when you have that happen, you have usually a person who is never going to form the standards and ideals and the ethics and the integrity in their entire life, because they'll never have that kind of bonded relationship with anybody in their life. It's not going to happen. The hellbender. I remember when I was in Philadelphia, there was a kid named Elliot. He was a red-headed little kid. He was 4 years old at the time, and his mother came to my mom's house. I was probably around 10 or 11, and they came and said, Elliot had an accident. What did Elliot do? Well, he was swinging on our chandelier like a monkey. He was watching a Tarzan movie, and he was swinging, making all these monkey sounds. And as he swung, the chandelier broke, crashing down. And the smithereens broke. Glass all over, and here's Elliot laying in glass. And he said to his mother, Mommy, something broke. That was what he said, Elliot. A little later, Elliot was watching a Texaco commercial in the 50s. Remember the Texaco gasoline where the guy has the gas cap? He's filling the gas tank. Well, he got the water hose and put it in Mom's gas tank and filled it up with water. And of course the car was ruined. The engine, when Dad started, water went right through the engine and I guess destroyed it or something. Elliot grew up continually to do things. He was also the kid who climbed roofs. He would go up and climb up there was the rain spout. He'd climb up and break and fall on the ground and get hurt and shake it off. He was tough little redheaded kid. But all through Elliot's life, he seemed to be what I consider a hellbender, someone who just risked more than others. We see them, the kids who drink a little bit more than everybody else, who do a little bit more drugs than everybody else, stays out a little bit later than everybody else, curses a little bit more than everyone. These are the kids that just do a little bit more than exploratory behavior. And we then can look at these kind of uncaring kids as, here's a hellbender. There's a kid who seems to always get into more trouble. Real problem to deal with, because these are the kids that go, we had another kid who would sled down a hill into the woods. There's trees and no one ever sledded in this particular area. It was a virgin area of snow. He and his father would go down, not knowing where they're going to wind up. And I'm my God, you're going to kill yourself. These are hellbenders, and they seem to be in the same family. The dad and the son seem to be the same kind of type. Anyone ever see these kind of kids in your life? Yeah, you can identify with it, yeah. Scary group of people, and they never learn. They're the ones who will jump out of the airplane and not check the parachute. You know, they're just cool. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And they're immortal. Okay. Next one is the transformer. This is the most confusing type, because the transformer is one that starts out pretty good. This is the kid that seems to be mindful, seems to be working well with you. At some point, it could be at 8 years of age, 9, 10, 12, 13, there seems to be a transformation in this child's life. And then we're looking to see what happened. What tragedy occurred to create this turmoil? So the first thing we do as good therapists, we probably think of abuse. The child was abused. Well, we find out maybe that's not true. The kid wasn't abused. Did mom and dad have a divorce? Well, they may have had a divorce, but it was after the transformation occurred, 5 years later maybe. Maybe the child blames the divorce on it, even though the behavior transformed 4 years earlier. And if we're therapists, well, probably mom and dad were arguing all these years, and it made some kind of impression on the child that ruined the child's life. Whatever the interpretations, we see transformation occurring. One of the characteristics that seems to be stable in these kids that transform from the good child to the child who's really wreaking havoc with their lives is that we find out that we're pretty easily led throughout their life. They seem to have a lower dominant, and I'm going to explain dominance in this afternoon's seminar. They seem to have a lower dominant character trait, which means they seem to, like the chameleon, they seem to follow the leads of a stronger personality. Remember the term in psychodynamic therapy, was it folie à deux, Carol? The insanity of the other, where you have two sisters, they classically say the older sister who's more dominant, the younger sister who's usually a normal person follows the character trait of the older, more dominant, crazy sister and becomes as crazy symbiotically enmeshed with the other personality, and they lose their own personality because they're lower dominant. The other dominant sister takes the dominant role, and the lower dominant person becomes enmeshed into the personality of the other. That's the chameleon. It's also the transformer. So very much alike, the chameleon and the transformer have character traits, except that the transformer did it later, didn't do it as early. And then they transform their personality. They become whatever they're being led to do. Very dangerous character trait, because these are the people that we read about in pairs of two. We'll see them in the Charlie Manson groups of people. I'm going to get more involved in that whole dominant theory, that they take on the personality structure of a more dominant person, which then allows them to commit heinous crimes in society that they would never do alone. In fact, they have conscience. They have remorse. They have the ability to have integrity, values. They've learned all of this. So they have bonding. Somehow, though, because of the lower dominant level of personality character trait, they lose it or give it up for someone else's personality. Frightening kind of person. And I've seen lots of kids throughout 30-some years of work that these kids exist. These are the parents, these kids' parents are those that I don't know what is going on. I don't know why. And they find a girlfriend, for instance, who has a very strong personality, and they hate now the parents together. And they go off on their own. And you'll lose. These are the kids that we lose because of the dominant structure. Anna Freud wrote about it. If you want to read all about that on her article back in the 50s or 60s, it's called On Adolescence. If you look about it in the psychoanalytic study of the child, you'll look up Anna Freud, and it's the article On Adolescence or Adolescence, And it talks about that whole process of how an adolescent, normal adolescent, this is normality, usually looks up to somebody when they're an adolescent, this is normal development, guys, that is between the age of the parent and their own age. So if you have an adolescent who's 13 and you have a 19-year-old guy coming into their life whose dominant personality, you're going to lose that kid. That kid's now going to go to this more dominant adolescent model. And then we struggle. This is a normal struggling. And if the kid is a transformer who has the ability to transform all their attentions and their ethics and their values onto this person, we may lose this kid temporarily, but during that loss, there's a dangerous, tragic kind of consequence that can happen. And that's where we as parents really got to pull together and get this kid back. That's where we lose them to cults and all kind of other, issues. So I share with you these character traits because it's really important in my work to be able to diagnose these kids more properly. And this is pretty new stuff. It's not been written anywhere. This is the kind of stuff that I work with all the time. You'll probably find other kind of profiles that aren't written here, but these are the major ones that I see coming up all the time. And as you look at this, you'll be able to see in your own practice or your own children these kind of character structures. Before I go on, any other questions about these kind of kids? Yeah. Uh-huh.
It seems like that would work with any of these kids, but these kids don't have bonding.
Yeah, if you have the detached syndrome that you're talking about, that's where the kid never had bonding in the very beginning. Renee Spitz talked about that kid as the analytic depressed, perhaps, or the child who lost their love, had the love attachment, then lost it for a year or two, and then had it again. They lost that whole early developmental kind of thing. Yeah, the bonding is a really essential ingredient. We don't know what's going to happen to a kid who doesn't have bonding, but it's not going to be good. And that's just a new diagnostic kind of formulation. It may be part of what we're seeing here. Okay. Any other questions about these profiles? Yes, Kim? These are the uncaring kids that I'm seeing. Yeah, they're very specific. These are the kids that are what we call treatment resistors, difficult kids to work with. They don't seem to respond to normal therapy. Okay? All right. Let me give you another handout. Earliest soft signs. This is the stuff that I want to share with you because in my work, and the work I'm doing it now with Child Family Center with Donna Kaywood, who eloquently discussed her role. We're seeing kids at 1.5, 2 years of age that we're able to actually look at and say, hey, they're presenting enough soft signs, not hard data, but enough stuff that we're looking at that I need, and this will probably interest you also, the fact that we can diagnose a child at 2 and say that this kid is demonstrating sufficient soft signs that's going to warrant some very special attention from the parent, even at 2. So why wait till 8? Why wait till 4? Why wait till 5? Let's get them as soon as possible. And I think it's an awakening to be able to see some of the character traits of these kids. Let's look at those. Everyone having one yet? You got them? Okay. Wait for this side. Okay, we all see kids that don't listen. How about easily distracted by noises or people? I see children, toddlers, they're walking and they seem to be easily startled. That may be the very first alarming kind of diagnostic view of a child who may be ADD. So he's going to have problems throughout. Now, one of these signs obviously is not enough, but we start to combine them. Lacks patience. seems not to be able to, easily frustrated, lacks that patience of attending to you, and they want to go from one thing to the next. They don't seem to be able to play very much or very long with something without getting frustrated. Projecting blame is a little older than 2, obviously, but that's something, again, in uncaring children. The child never seems to want to assume any responsibility for anything. It's always someone else's fault. You did it, she did it, I didn't do it. I remember a kid at Devereaux who I saw stealing $5 out of my pants. I was a sailing instructor, and my pants were on the thing, and I was doing at camp in Maine. And the kid took the money. I was watching him. Took the money. And this is a kid he was called antisocial, but I was bonded with him, I thought. He had learned to sail. He was a brilliant sailor. This guy was incredible. He was my best buddy, and everyone said he was a psychopath. I said, no. This kid and I, we are great together. He takes the money in my pants, and I get up, and I see him put them in his pocket. I said, Jackie, what are you doing? He said, nothing. I said, didn't you just take something out of my trousers? He said, no. I said, would you empty your pocket for me? He said, sure. So he takes the $5 out. Yeah, what about it? It's mine. He said, I saw you take it out of my pants. He said, you're wrong. And I started, maybe I was wrong. I was dreaming or something. I started to look at myself. Something's wrong with me. But that's how this kid would be with everything. And I was always taking his side after a while because I thought we had this great relationship. And I realized he was autoplastic. He had no sense of reality. Whether he believed it or not, he wasn't going to take blame for anything. Never could take the blame. It was scary. And from that moment on, it was like I lost something. Because I'd worked with this kid for 5 months previously, and I thought we were real good buddies. And it was disastrous. Okay. Disobeys the rules at home. Okay. Has little or no regard for the rights of others. Don't we see infants or toddlers coming over and smacking a kid in the mouth, grabs their toy, and seems to be a little different than the rest of the kids in the play group. They seem to be able to push people, almost a bully type. Yeah? We have kids like that now, don't we? Shows no respect for authority, difficulty with play. That would be the same kind of kid that seemed to be struggling with your play. Unreliable, attitude towards school, superficial or poor interpersonal relationships, insist on doing things his way, mood swings. Now we can see that with youngsters. We see them at 1 year of age, 1.5 and 2. These kids seem to have a very quick change in mood. Sees life as a bore and rarely admits to having fun. They're tough kids to work with. Accident prone like Elliot. Risk taker like Elliot. Has run away from home overnight or longer. Well, we don't have any 1 or 2 years old doing that. Skipped school, stolen items or shoplifted, suspended or expelled, has made threats, has been in trouble with the police. Superficial talk. What's superficial talk? Have you been involved with someone you're in a session with, and they're talking, and they're jabbing, but nothing's coming out? They're not talking about anything that has any substance. And they don't seem to you'd ever learn who they are. Yeah? Expecting others to indulge him. Dismisses usual recognition of good deeds, manipulative, knack for forgetfulness, and poor school grades. Okay, all of those are signs that we can see from age 2. Yes?
When you say knack for forgetfulness, that doesn't mean true forgetfulness. It means the ability to say, oh, I forgot.
Right, right, right. Okay. Questions thus far? Any discussion? Okay, we're going to take about a 10-minute the response. A lot of questions have been relevant because someone was asking, what do you do when you have dysfunctional parents? How can you, and I basically, how do you work with a family that's dysfunctional? If the parents are, we're not dealing with the bad parents now, we're dealing with the good parents, okay, who have an unusually difficult child. When you have dysfunctional parents, I wouldn't trust mom and dad with affecting this plan, because I don't think I can affect it with them, let alone have them. I wouldn't do it. So I'm not sure what I'd do. That's a whole different bag of worms, and it's a bag of worms. I'm not sure you can do anything until you make parents a little, sane. And that may take you 3 years right there, or maybe never. Maybe they're uncaring parents, who knows. But I'm not dealing with those parents. I do deal with them, but I'm talking about, for the sake of this workshop, we're dealing with one substract. Please don't confuse this again with all the other psychotherapy interventions you do. This again is one dimension. And I have to keep saying that, because when you have dysfunctional parents, then we're dealing with the systems theories, we're dealing with Bowen kind of family therapy, we're dealing with Don Block, we're dealing with the Ackerman Institute, we're dealing with a whole different array of treatment. Satir, Peggy Papp, whatever your background is, doesn't matter. They all come out the same. But we're dealing with pathology now. This is not pathology in that sense. This is behavioral pathology on one person who's creating dysfunction for the family. Then, okay, we got to the fourth. Now the fifth step is when we have kids who are still not responding to the even more difficult kind of kid, I found something pretty useful, and that was to do a thing like called overcorrection. Overcorrection is where they don't seem to be responding. They're still maintaining some kind of, the grounding doesn't seem to be working, taking the privileges don't seem to be working. So I want to do something that's going to precipitate even more disarray in this kid's life. I want to cause anxiety for them. I don't want any more anxiety. I'm tired of I'm tired of the parents' anxiety. They've suffered enough. I want this kid to feel bad. So I'm going to say to the kid, okay, your grades are still stinky, you're not studying. I'm going to give you 3 extra assignments, if it's school related. And when your normal assignments and these 3 extra ones are done, your privileges will be reinstated. Real simple. Crime meets the punishment. If the kid won't do his chores, he refuses, I say, okay, I'm going to have you do the bathroom, the kitchen, and maybe the other bathroom. I'm going to add chores to you that I'm not going to accumulate these things. This is just going to do it one time. Don't accumulate it every day. Punishment is only good for 24 hours, so I don't make anything go beyond that. So I'll say, okay, your normal chores have to be done, plus these 3 additional chores. And I don't care how long you decide it takes to do them, but they're going to be done well. That's overcorrection. So if you want to stay in here a week or 2 or 3 weeks, that's your choice again. Again, I'm giving the kid the power to make a decision. I'm not going to ram it down his throat and force him to make a decision. You're on your own. You do it when you feel you want to do it. And this is pretty weird for a kid to hear a parent taking that kind of course, because I'm giving the kid the option to fail, not to do it, or not to go out, or to go out and have his privilege reinstated. That's a very strange kind of activity for a parent, to disengage themselves from the conflict or neutralize what we used to call power struggle. That is the greatest neutralization there is. I'm not going to worry about you being oppositional or defiant. I don't care. I'm not interested in what you're doing anymore. All this crap that you've been pulling, I'm only interested in, you're going to complete these things. If you don't do it, that's okay, but you're not having your privilege reinstated. That's the end of it. Now, if the kid misbehaves and becomes disrespectful during this phase, that's a second issue. The first issue is already done. If he's disrespectful, is creating havoc in the house, that's where we put him in the room. 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes, whatever it is. That's where you have to take care of additional behavior, but that doesn't change the other punishment. Don't increase his punishment on this side. A lot of parents get so involved in more punishment, more you're going to do this, that the kid has no incentive to ever get out of punishment. But we're just going to restrict and create a semblance of reality for the parents so we don't have to face this kid's tirades. And when he's willing to come back, he's back, but he's still grounded until he does his chores, whatever they might be. That's probably the bulk of most of the kids that we see who are uncaring or difficult. These are the kids that usually don't buy into the rules in the house. And these are probably maybe 85% of the kids that we see in practice that behave this way, that will respond real effectively within a few weeks. Again, it's important to allow the kid to make his choice and a result of either choice. It doesn't really matter what he does. Don't get involved, or don't have the parent get involved in emotion at this point, just results. And he has to comply and do what's expected as a quality. In other words, if he's going to clean something, make sure it's cleaned well, not loud, so that if he doesn't clean it well, let him take his time. Let him take another couple days to do it. When he's ready to do it and he's ready to want to go out to play again or go to the movie again or use the phone again or whatever he's doing or watch TV, he's going to eventually do this. It's going to be that one kind of kid that we run across every once in a while that doesn't respond to anything you do. And he's going to be different than everybody else. And I think that's about 5% of the kids that I deal with. 1 out of 20 are total treatment resistors. And we used to be afraid to call a kid treatment resistor because I remember going to a lot of the Virginia Satir workshops, and she would say there was no such thing as a treatment resistor. You just haven't dug deep enough. And her clonies, all those croonies over there that they're from Avante would all go, "You're right, Virginia. They need to," they would all support her, and her book was well written, but I'll tell you something, there's a real illusion going on with this idea that if you continue giving love and tender love to kids, they're going to eventually respond. These kids will eat you up alive. They'll destroy you, eat you right up. It doesn't matter if they're oppositional or not, but they'll absolutely cherish all the giving you give. They're not prepared to give you back. They don't give a damn. So we have to pull ourselves away, and sometimes the best way to love someone is not always the easiest way. And pulling your love away from someone doesn't mean you're cutting them out of your life, but you are giving up emotionally something. You're letting go emotionally for the time being to be able to effect a better response. It doesn't mean cutting them out of your life. It doesn't mean you're no longer alive, you're dead, and I'm not your mother anymore or your father anymore. It means that as long as you behave in this manner, I'm not going to feed you emotionally because you're destroying us. So I'm going to have to survive somehow. And it's real difficult. It's a conceptualization you have to train a parent to understand because they're not ready to feel that. They don't want to feel that. They don't want to give up on the kid because they're being told you can't give up on the kid. And you're not giving up on the kid. It's a philosophy you've got to imbibe, you've got to give this parent to train them that this is an effective communication. And when they're ready, they're still part of the family. You're going to give them love and all the stuff you want to give them, but not on their terms. That's all. You're just letting go for the time being. And that may take you months to deal with a parent to get them to understand and appreciate that. And that's sometimes the hardest therapy there is. And that's why my work is usually with the parents when I find these kids, not with the kid. Because my time with the kid is going to be a waste and just cost the parents a lot more grief and money and time. It's not going to work. Okay, overcorrection. Some other difficult kids, I talk about token reinforcers. You've all heard about that from the token economy books that are put out in the 50s and 60s. And I use that with kids that are usually the ones that are more frustrating, that don't seem to care if you take their privileges away. They don't even seem to care if you give them chores to do. They seem to, oh, that's good, I'll do the chore. And you're sitting there, they don't seem to, do you ever have a kid who doesn't care about anything? We have kids like that, really frustrating. And they're the kids I find to be the most difficult of the difficult kids, because they don't seem to be real bad, but they don't seem to care about play. They can sit in their room and twiddle a broom or do anything in the room. They don't seem to care if you punish them. They don't seem to care if you take their privileges away, because they don't have a lot of interest. So they have very little interest to begin with, very little motivation or ambition, and the more you take away, it's almost like, my God, if I take any more away from this kid, he's not going to do anything. They're the kids I like to do a token economy with, and I like to use token chips and say, if you can attain these things, we can give you things you want, and it's more of a way to get them to enlist in that group. And that's I define that in the book, and that seems to work with that particular kind of group more effectively with most other incentives. Again, I don't use a direct one-to-one ratio. For instance, if a kid does something good, you don't immediately give them a reward. I like to get like a 3-to-1. Do 3 good things and I'll give you one thing back. 1-to-1 rarely works. It usually contaminates a child for the reward system. because a kid said, well, I need to go to the movies and I need $5, so I'll wash your car. So his only incentive is to get what he wants when he wants it. That's impulsive again. I'd rather not teach him more impulsive, primary process kind of stuff. So I like to do a 3 to 5 to 1 ratio. And I set that up so that